Welcome to the Liverpool.com podcast, my final Liverpool.com podcast. I'll not go into any more on that because there's other exits that we want to talk about today. But with me, Dan Morgan, I've got James Martin and Kai Delaney, and the other exits and appointments, I guess, we want to talk about is those of managers within the Premier League. And in a way, we'll link them back to Liverpool Football Club, and we do have quite the jump-off point this week with Rafa Benitez being confirmed as Everton's new manager at Goodison Park. This isn't going to be a podcast about Everton, believe you me, that's not something I can sit through. But it is going to be a podcast about the concept of managers and where the state of managers are in today's football sphere and in the Premier League in particular. But James, we'll start with Rafa, and I think it's important, firstly, to recognise and to sort of make clear to the watching audience that this is three people on this podcast who are all from different parts of the country, all Liverpool supporters, and therefore all have different sort of cultural references and affiliations to Liverpool, which is completely fine and is completely varied. So my reaction to Rafa Benitez joining Everton is, I would say, potentially similar to if Rafa Benitez had joined Manchester United for other people. Other people could be very nonchalant about Rafa Benitez joining Everton. But for me, Everton is the first fixture I look at when the fixtures are released. It is the game that I really don't want to lose at any point during the season. And in the spirit of, I'd say 90% good-humoured rivalry, I don't want Everton to be successful. So, I mean, where Benitez is with me at the minute, I'm just trying to come to terms with the strangeness of it. I mean, but for you, where does it sit with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the kind of the cultural differences in terms of being a Liverpool fan, actually based in Liverpool and then based elsewhere. For me, yeah, it's definitely strange. It is one which takes time to process, but I think inevitably it's not going to be as unusual for me as it would be, or as upsetting for me as it might be for people based in the city where the rivalry is felt more on a kind of day-to-day basis. Especially as well, there's an age thing that you have to factor in the sense that I've never really been experiencing the rivalry when it was competitive in terms of going for the same spots. Very early on, I suppose, there was that kind of 2004-05 season, of course, Rafa's best season with Liverpool, but where Everton, I think, finished fourth and Liverpool came fifth. But beyond that, it's not been close. So for me, the rivalry has just been it's been more of a funny thing. It's fun to laugh at Everton's failures, but I've never felt it as keenly as I'm sure people in the city do. So yeah, from my perspective, I don't think it's something that could ever taint Rafa's legacy. There's always those memories from Istanbul. It's, formative memories, and yeah, I can totally understand why people don't like it, but from my perspective, yeah, it's strange, but I would always wish him well, but obviously not too well in this case.
Come on to legacy in a moment, Kai, but just in terms of yourself, are you similar to James, or are you more on my side of just being totally conflicted about the whole thing?
I think naturally, as you mentioned earlier, kind of due to upbringing, where we're from and things, I'm more with James. I mean, my first actual derby wasn't until the title-winning season a couple of years ago. So I went to both the home ones that year, and it was only really, being in the ground and seeing it firsthand, and also being in the office with people like yourself, and on the other side, Adam Jones, Sam Carroll from the sports desk, and how much it means to them. That you kind of realise the magnitude of it, because on paper, if you take the fact that it's a derby out of it, Everton are nowhere near Liverpool. It's not as most. It doesn't matter as much as a top six game, for example, in terms of the league and the standings. But of course, when you factor in the city side and the derby element, it completely transforms into, as you say, it's the first fixture that you look for. But no, in terms of Rafa going there, I'm not too concerned by it. I think he's only there now because of where he is and the manager he is. Now he's not the manager he was when he was at Liverpool and Champions Leagues, Napoli, Real Madrid. I think he's been at Newcastle for a while, and his stature maybe isn't once where it was. And I think it's taking away that fact that he was Liverpool manager and obviously everything he did for us, it's probably a good fit. It's just whether people are able to get over that, which I fully understand that a lot of Liverpool fans but mainly it seemed Evertonians, it's not for them at the moment.
Yeah, I'll never forget those blue microphone covers in the office. James, on the question of legacy, then, I think it's unwise to assume that Rafa's legacy at Liverpool is solidified as something of a legend. Let's not forget, from around, I'd say, as early as 2007 onwards, there was quite a divide amongst Liverpool fans around Benitez's style of football, around the certain tactics he'd use at certain points in the season, definitely around things like his substitutions. And there are some who I'll admit, I was sort of at odds with in the stadium at times during games, after games, through defending Rafa, that, really didn't want him at the club. And that was going on for a couple of years before he did eventually leave. So, I think we have to be careful to assume that, this was a European Cup winning manager for Liverpool, but, there were questions there around his ability and certainly his legacy long before, he actually left the club. And there is, I will sort of defend him in that there is the caveat of the turmoil that was in and around the club at that time with Hicks and Gillette, and that shouldn't be underplayed because it was an absolute mess and Liverpool were almost, forced into liquidation. But I think it's, it's not something we can assume that this is on a par with a sort of Kenny, Paisley, even I would say now Jurgen Klopp figure taking the Everton job.
Yeah, that's definitely true. But I think it also depends how you're sort of thinking about legacy, in the sense that there's one way of thinking about it, that he will always be the manager who was in charge for Istanbul, which is, no one can change that. And that is a legacy in itself, because, for one thing, any European Cup winning manager is someone who's always going to be remembered fondly. But to do it in that manner, of course, I think it cements some kind of legend status, even regardless of what he goes on to do. But yeah, you're right. In terms of the actual holistic achievements and even how he got the team playing, there are plenty of other managers who will rank higher than him in that pecking order. And I think I would agree that Klopp is now one of them, bringing home the Champions League and, of course, the Premier League, which Rafa just fell short of. So yeah, it would be worse if one of those kind of bona fide legends were to make this switch, but then they wouldn't, because they're too good. Their standing in the game is too high. If you look at someone like a Klopp, it wouldn't happen, and that's the reality of it now. Kai touched on it earlier. Benitez and the level he's at the moment, Everton is about right, and I think that does make it easier to come to terms with, because it's not like they're nabbing someone who would come in and improve Liverpool now. It's Liverpool have moved on. Benitez is part of a great past of the club, and I think for me that legacy is secure. But where he is now, and those potentially negative tactics, it's a different era for Liverpool, and he just represents where Everton are at the moment. And yeah, it is what it is, really.
Do you think, Kai, that we assume a sense of ownership over certain managers who've been successful with Liverpool? We sort of claim them to be ours, and Rafa did an awful lot for the city, did a lot for the Hillsborough Justice campaign, which shouldn't go unnoticed. But that sense of, like James says, he was a European Cup winning manager for Liverpool, and they get adorned on flags and they join such rich company. It has been strange to see Benitez's journey since Liverpool, hasn't it? There's some. I remember some quotes from him when he initially left Liverpool and said, "I'll be back here to manage one day." He's so certain of that fact, and I wasn't sure of that, and now I'd say that there's absolutely no chance that happens. I'd say his former captain's got a much more certain degree of that happening than him ever managing Liverpool again. But yeah, it has been strange to see the paths he's taken, which we'll come on to a bit more in a minute. Since he left Liverpool.
Yeah, I think, as you said there, the one thing this move has done has completely ruled out any tiny chance there may have been of him ever returning to Liverpool as a manager. And for that to have happened anyway, I think Liverpool's stock would have had to have fallen quite dramatically from where they are. He couldn't come in as a Klopp replacement in 2 or 3 years' time, for example, anyway. But I think that ship has well and truly sailed. But yeah, as a club, Liverpool do kind of take ownership with people, and it's not just managers, as players as well. We're so tribal as a club, and these players, they become legends, and they have flags on the cop, and they have songs sung about them. And I think that's why you don't see it as much with Liverpool players moving and playing to other top 6 rivals in England. But you look at Man City, Man United buying players from Arsenal, Tottenham, Kane moving to City. All these teams seem to share players, but with Liverpool it doesn't happen as much, and that's why when someone like Torres leaves, goes to Chelsea, or even Sterling to City, it does hurt, because you see them as one of your own. And Rafa was always like that. Everything he did in Istanbul, I think his legacy will not be harmed. I think it will always be there, and for what he did, and winning that Champions League and the way it was won as well. But yeah, I mean, this isn't the first one. He went to Chelsea, and that was strange for a lot of people as well. I know he was only there a short time, but to go to Chelsea, a team which doesn't have the best of relationship with Liverpool as a club, I think they're two polar opposites in the way they operate. To go there and win a European trophy for them is a strange one as well. But yeah, I think to see him at Everton now is just kind of sums up where he is at in his managerial career, and he's not maybe the manager he was maybe 5 years ago.
I mean, he loves a challenge, Kai. We can say that much, don't we? He's gone to Napoli. He's gone to Inter after Mourinho wins a treble. He's gone to Chelsea and done Real Madrid after Ancelotti, and then there's Newcastle working under Mike Ashley. I mean, Rafa Benitez, there's got to be a part of him that enjoys it. There's got to be a part of him that thinks it's some kind of sadistic challenge that he can sort of succeed at. It's such a strange path that he takes, seemingly all the time. Like, the greater the challenge, the more he seems to take it. And the thing about it is, he knows what his reputation will be like with a lot of Evertonians, because he's lived it. He's lived in the city. You can say like about him being close to home and stuff like that, but he's been in visceral Merseyside derbies. He knows what the feeling is towards him. He knows that what being a Liverpool manager incurs when you come across certain Evertonians, a lot of which, the majority of which will be absolutely reasonable and pleasant, but it does carry that edge to it. It does carry that sense of risk to it, and to go right into the sort of frying pan of managing them, then I don't know. There is. I mean, I wish him nothing but the best to a degree with this next venture, but yeah, there is something quite sadistic about his managerial choices.
Yeah, you've got to admire it. I think even going way back to Valencia. I mean, he took on the underdogs there and ultimately came out on top and won the league. But I guess if he could make it a success at Everton and even win a trophy, or if he could be there for several years, break into the top 6 into Europe, then it would arguably be. It's never going to eclipse Istanbul, but you'd have to say it'd be right up there in terms of his achievements. If he could get the Evertonians on side, and it's probably the one job in the world that it's the most difficult one for him to walk into, and fair play to him, he's done it, and remains to be seen how well he can do. But he does have a track record, as you say. Mike Ashley at Newcastle, a very short spell at Chelsea. He liked to follow Jose around after. Jose was in his pomp at that time, winning trebles left, right, and centre, and then moving on. And Rafa was the man next in line. But no, I mean, if he can make it work, then you got to take your hat off to him. And I think it'll be one of his greatest achievements if he can get a trophy or build a legacy at Everton, given what's gone before.
Absolutely. I mean, he's not the only managerial appointment this week, James. Nuno Espirito Santo has been confirmed as the Tottenham manager, alongside, I can never pronounce his full name. I'll find it now. I forgot his first name, actually, the director of football at Tottenham, Fabio Paratici, who's come in. So you wrote a piece yesterday on how that sort of has shades of, as we agreed on, sort of a Liverpool 2010 to 2012 vibe about it. You know, Espirito Santo seems very much head coach, especially when you consider who's gone before him at Tottenham: Mauricio Pochettino, Jose Mourinho, big personalities, managers of every sense of the word, and now you've got this sort of head coach slash director of football model at play with Daniel Levy, of course, still there. I mean, there is a worry if you're Tottenham that this is a sort of plaster sticking appointment, which is not one that really would be the choice if the choice was there to be had, but it's one that is sort of the best they can do with what's available, is what it seems to me.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I wouldn't have minded if they'd announced that a few hours earlier, because it meant elements of that piece were immediately out of date. But it mostly still stands up, which is fine. But yeah, I don't think it's one that anyone can really get that excited about. I think the buzzword among the Spurs fans at the moment is underwhelming. I think some of it has been quite harsh in the sense that until last season, everything that Nuno had done had been actually quite impressive. I mean, he walked the Championship, admittedly, with an expensively assembled squad, and then first season in the Premier League, I think they finished 7th. It's a very good debut season in the Premier League. And I think Liverpool fans would be some of the first to acknowledge that last season had a lot of extenuating circumstances with pandemic-affected things. So there's certainly excuses for the underperformance last season. But yeah, it's not the most exciting in the world. And the key thing, as you say, is how he relates to Paratici in this kind of hierarchy. You'd have to imagine he's coming in as something of sort of not second choice, but he's below Paratici in terms of the decision-making tree. And it's a question of how's that going to work. It's always quite an uncomfortable relationship, even for the kind of easygoing managers. You've got the issue that they've appointed someone in charge of football matters or some kind of equivalent phrase, and that person isn't the manager in charge of getting the results on the football pitch. I mean, It's inevitably going to be that kind of tricky dynamic, however good both parties are at managing it. So yeah, it'll be an interesting one to watch. Obviously, Liverpool saw it unfold, as you touched upon, in that kind of 2010 to 2012 era with Kamoli. What I would say, and again, what I mentioned in the piece, is that did ultimately lead to the transfer committee and then the Michael Edwards model, which has worked so well. So it could be the start of a path to smarter recruitment for Spurs. There are reasons to be hopeful about it, but yeah, in the short term, it does feel a bit like they've just brought in a big name transfer guru from Juventus, hoping it'll solve all their problems, when, like you say, it's probably more of a sticking plaster over a gaping wound sort of situation.
It does feel, Kai, doesn't it, that you'd say Tottenham and Arsenal now are really suffering with a lack of identity. And I think that is on no part the blame of Nuno Espirito Santo or Mikel Arteta. But, you know, you've got to look at both clubs and really feel like they've lost their way over the past few years, and in particular Spurs more latterly, but Arsenal's decline has been more elongated, you'd say. But, you know, you have to really sort of think that as a sort of case study watching them, this is something that can happen really quickly for two, you would say, established top 6 clubs. Tottenham winning a Champions League final 3 years ago and look to be on the ascendancy in general in terms of their trajectory. It is quite the fall for them in terms of where they've ended up. And at times, you know, sort of an outside looking in, which we'll come on to a bit more in a bit, it can seem to be just one managerial appointment. It can seem to be just 1 year of stagnation. It can just seem to be one transfer window in which you don't get things right, and all of a sudden the whole narrative flips on its head. It is a reminder, isn't it?
I think the obvious thing that both those teams, Tottenham and Arsenal, have in common is the stadium. They both spent heavily on a impressive new stadium, and I have to say that Spurs Spurs New Stadium is incredible. Went there for a game a couple of years ago, and it is one of the best in England. But the outlay that goes on that then potentially gets taken away from transfers and development in other areas of the club. So that's obviously one of the big factors. But yeah, with Spurs, they went for so many different managers that the lack of identity is a real thing, as you touched on there. They ended up appointing Nuno, who's been playing three at the back for quite a few years, but differs hugely in style to Pochettino, to Conte, to Gattuso. At one point they were talking with. So I don't think they know what they want. And they've ended up with Nuno, who at one point was in talks with Crystal Palace. So it's not as if Nuno was still in the job and they've said, yeah, he's the man we want. They've gone for him and agreed a release clause to get him out. It's very much a case of he was the 5th, 6th, 7th, however many you want to say, in line, and they've ended up with him. And I think the 2-year contract says a lot. Very similar to Tuchel at Chelsea. They initially gave him an 18-month deal, and I think that's something we're seeing more of now, and we're going to see more of in the future, where the manager is more of a coach. You have a system in place, and the club kind of operates without a real philosophy, and it's just one coach will come in, do an 18-month, 2-year job, and then he'll be moved on. And at Chelsea it works, but at Tottenham, since Pochettino's left, they've not had success, and they look to be jumping on that kind of style themselves, handing out short contracts and getting rid of Mourinho after 18 months. So you do have to be careful that you don't end up just in a spiral. And if you can have a philosophy, you look at Liverpool as an example, where of course the whole club is built around Klopp and he's so integral to it, but it's managed so well off the pitch with FSG and the development of the stadium and the training ground, that you do feel if the right person was available to come in after Klopp, you could almost continue on without a complete upheaval.
Yeah, I mean, the only other appointment of note this week, James, is Patrick Vieira, which we're still waiting to have confirmed at Crystal Palace. I mean, Palace is mad, by the way. They've got about 20 players out of contract. So anyone taking that job is setting themselves up for a busy summer, put it that way. But, I mean, Vieira, he's not renowned as having a successful managerial career. I think it's worth saying it's notable and credible, and a genuine sort of positive whenever more black managers are given jobs higher up, especially in the Premier League. And obviously, for that reason, you would say you want him to do well there, but he has got a job on his hands. I guess what I'm getting at, though, I mean, is in general, the paucity, if you like, of not just managers, but you would say sort of aspirational young coaches coming through is something which, I often wonder about this. Is there a lack of them, or are they just not getting the right chances? Could Eddie Howe have done a better job at any of those 3 clubs than who the clubs are going to hire? Is there a case that Graham Potter could have moved to the likes of Spurs or Everton and maybe done a better job and put in place something more sustainable? I guess it's all about what the clubs want in one sense, but it does strike me that there isn't a wealth of managerial options out there right now.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we're still mentioning Eddie Howe, I think, kind of sums it all up, given that he was, promising at Bournemouth, but then ultimately took him down and, sort of disappeared off the radar. But still, he comes up in conversations about the promising young managers. I mean, I saw Gary Neville did an interview with Sir Alex Ferguson the other day, and he asked him about promising young managers. And again, it was Eddie Howe getting brought up, despite this kind of absence from the top level for quite some time. And I think that does speak to a lack of viable options. I think the new equivalent, if you like, is Graham Potter, who I think is a very interesting manager. He's got a great backstory in terms of his education as a kind of motivator, public speaking type background, and interesting to see how he brings that into the football setting. And yeah, promising start to his career in England for sure. But yeah, there aren't a huge number of coaches out there who you'd highlight and say, they're on the right track. They've shown some promise. I mean, you'd look at Gerrard as another one, to be fair, but again, it's at a level below where perhaps we've seen young managers get given the chance before. No disrespect at all to Rangers, massive club, of course, but in terms of the biggest leagues, he's not got that break just yet. So yeah, I don't really know what's the cause of it. I think it's probably a case of club hierarchies just being a bit more methodical and a bit more safe. So you don't really see quite as many just taking wild punts, and the preference is someone with the perception as a little bit more of a safe pair of hands. And I think Palace is a case study of why that can be a bad idea. It's halted progression, but equally they're the same club who hired Frank de Boer and had to give up after 6 games without a goal because it just didn't work. And that is the other side of the coin. When you try and take a chance on someone young and a bit more exciting, then it can backfire horribly. So I understand it from club perspectives as well.
I mean, I think all of this, James, comes back to, from a Liverpool perspective, how lucky we are to have Jurgen Klopp in charge of Liverpool. And I think when you see, the reason I wanted to do this podcast and talk on a more broader scope, not just the Benitez Everton thing, was because you get to see, I guess, how much upheaval there can be if you don't have the right manager in place, if you don't have the right structure there from the get-go. And, you know, Liverpool not having these headaches, Liverpool being able to react to what is hopefully going to be their worst season under Klopp this summer, and just logistically having a club which is settled is now, in many forms, a rarity, isn't it, in this game? You know, he is, am I right in thinking he's the longest or second longest serving manager in the Premier League now? And that is, you know, something which, going back to Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger days, would be seen as still a relatively early tenure. But Jurgen Klopp is somebody who, you know, Liverpool should be grateful not only to have him and his ability and skill set, but also to have his ability to stabilise the club in the manner in which he's done. Yeah,
stability is the word, really. It's such an important thing for a Premier League club and such a rare thing. When you put it like that, I do think he is possibly the longest serving manager in the Premier League now, which is, like you say, would have been unthinkable sort of even a generation ago, that someone who's been here, coming up to 6 years, is the longest serving manager. But yeah, that's just the way the game is these days. And to be fair, if you look at it from like a Chelsea perspective, they'd say, well, look, we're thriving in the upheaval. We're getting new managers in left, right and centre. They win us a trophy and then they leave again. And that is a model which it can have some success. And I think it is easy to look down on it and say, where's your identity? But equally, having that kind of stability is such a plus, because it means any kind of, well, not failures, but any kind of doubts in other areas, they can be, well, they're made less major. So for a club like Chelsea, they have to get the recruitment spot on, and then it's the manager which becomes almost secondary. Whereas for Liverpool, they've got the manager spot on, and things like transfers become secondary. Obviously, everyone still wants to strengthen. There are areas where everyone would say, I really hope Liverpool make a signing here. I mean, midfield springs to mind with Wijnaldum going. Everyone wants an extra attacking option, I think. But equally, there is that element of faith, because Klopp has built this system where you just trust him. Whoever he has at his disposal, you know that he'll get the best out of them. And you know that there's a system in place, a style in place, where Liverpool can sort of just keep operating, not regardless of personnel, because every top club needs top players. But there is that element of the manager is the key rather than the players necessarily. And yeah, to have that stability for going on 6 years now it's just huge.
Yeah, I mean, he's such a massive personality, Kai, as well, isn't he? And when, you know, we talk at the top of the show about the concept of like what defines a Liverpool manager and, you know, what defines the concept of legacy, Jurgen Klopp has absolutely covered every angle with that. And I think when, you know, I was writing down the agenda, it does strike me that Jurgen Klopp is probably the closest thing that you would get to Steven Gerrard in terms of Liverpool being a one-club man. For him, you know, you couldn't envisage him ever managing in the Premier League another side. Whereas perhaps even Gerrard, you could. So I'm probably saying I'm probably doing him down in that sense. I guess where I'm coming from is there's such an identity attached to Klopp. There's such a thought out process about who he likes to affiliate himself to, you know, the projects which are right to him. And the fact that they are just that, they're projects. You know, he aligns himself to the club, the ethos, the values. He very much goes somewhere to build a culture. And, you know, we've had that. We've had the fortune to see that unfold. And I think when we look at the modern game and all the things we've spoken about in this podcast, it's such a rarity. It's such a positive, the way in which football is going. It is such a, you know, it is a transient environment, and to see that sort of play out might be for the last time. We don't know, but with such a talented manager, it's been a privilege in many senses.
Yeah, it almost feels like he's part of a dying breed. I think you go back to, as you said earlier, the likes of Ferguson, Wenger, the days of anything over 10 years are well and truly gone. And for Klopp to already have 5 or 6 under his belt, and by the time his contract's up, I think he'll be close to 10 years if he doesn't sign another one. Whether Liverpool ever have another manager that does close to 10 years again, the way modern football is now, I'm not so sure. Every other club seems to be doing 2-3 years, and then you're only ever 5 or 6 games or bad results away from the sack. And ridiculously, some people were suggesting that Klopp could be sacked or resign, you know, during Liverpool's bad run last season, despite all the mitigating circumstances around it. But you know, he's only managed 3 clubs. He's famously said, hasn't he, that if he manages Mainz, Dortmund and Liverpool, and he only manages 3 teams before he retires, and he'll be happy, and that'll do for him. And was it 7 years at Mainz, 7 years at Dortmund, I think? Correct me if I'm wrong, but he looks like he could beat that at Liverpool if he sees out his contract, and doesn't strike me as the type of manager that would necessarily even take any other job in club football. Certainly the Premier League, I think you can rule that out now. The only one I could see potentially would be Germany, the national job. I don't think he'd go back to Bayern Munich given his links with Dortmund there, but I think his pedigree is that if he wanted the German job at any point in his career, he could just say, I want it now, and they'd pretty much get rid of whoever's in charge, and he can walk into that and, you know, enjoy it as his kind of retirement job in the latter stages of his career. But yeah, I mean, coming back to Liverpool, he's absolutely built a legacy. You know, he was even involved with the plans for the new Kirby training ground, and if that doesn't tell you how invested he is in the club and how invested the club are in him in turn, then, you know, I think that's everything you need to know right there, that he's here for the long haul, and I don't think he'll ever be at another club in England. And as you were talking about earlier, Liverpool owning our managers and owning our players, he is one of those that, you know, he'll be on a flag, and I think 10-15 years time he'll have a statue for what he's done.
Absolutely, many of them, I'd say. Huge thanks to James, huge thanks to Kai. It's been something a little bit different from the usual transfer chat, but we hope you've enjoyed it. And yeah, I hope you're doing well out there. Leave some nice feedback for us, because it's always nice to be nice, especially Evertonians watching this. We try to keep it of a level. So yeah, huge thanks to the guys, and we'll be back soon with the next Liverpool.com podcast. Take care. Bye.
And Dan, just before we get off, just a quick thank you for your hosting of Liverpool.com podcast for the last couple of years and everything you've done on the site, and good luck in the future.
Thank you very much. It's been a great experience, and best of luck to everyone. And I'm sure you'll still catch me about on different platforms, and maybe even this one in some time to come. But yeah, something new for me, which I'm looking forward to, and it's been a pleasure working with you all. So thank you.